This is a project which is co-authored with Srinaget Navakapru, who's at Brown University. So, as Seema told us in the morning, by way of motivation, malnutrition in children in India is very high. So about 40% of the world's malnourished children reside in India, and 35% of the developing world's low birth weight infants are also found in India. This phenomenon is not just children specific. So in 1999-2000, around 233 million adults were also undernourished in caloric and micronutrient terms. And these rates are higher among population groups such as SCs and STs. And so a response to this problem has been the targeted public distribution system. So government has designed this program to combat malnourishment. So that's the primary goal of this program. It's a very large program, and it provides subsidized delivery of rice, wheat, and other goods like sugar and kerosene to households. The grains are provided at a subsidy to the households that are classified as BPL, and there are over 65 million people classified as BPL. This program is around 5% of the central government's expenditure, which is more than twice allocated to education. So it's a very, very large program. I don't know if this pre-Narega, this was also the largest anti-poverty level, but this could have changed after Narega. It also costs 1.3% of the GDP. So it's a very, very massive program from just public finance perspective. The scale of leakage in the program is equally massive. So it's there's a recent estimate that puts the leakage at about 44%, which is actually an improvement over previous years. Okay, so
Rajiv Gandhi's famous comment of 1985, 85% disappears, comes from the leakage.
Right.
So now it's come down.
Yes. Yes. So obviously there's a lot of significant interest both among researchers and policymakers to reform this program, and two broad camps have emerged. So there is one camp that's emphasizing a move to a cash transfer or a food voucher program, and just like the food voucher programs in various parts of the developed world. But there's also another school of thought that says that we should improve the status quo by improving monitoring, expanding coverage, and also making the program more generous. The second approach has crystallized into what is called the National Food Security Bill. But the success of this bill critically relies on identifying low-cost and effective monitoring and enforcement mechanisms, and figuring out what would be the implications of these mechanisms for more vulnerable populations. So against that background, this paper, in this paper we are looking at a specific context of the scheduled caste take-up of the TPDS, and we want to examine how the identity of the delivery agent can affect service delivery. And we also want to evaluate the effectiveness of increasing monitoring and enforcement. So if we did that, what would be the implications on welfare? Okay, so local power relationships and corruptions have been established to undermine service delivery, and there's a lot of research that tries to look at what can improve local service delivery. So formal legislative mechanisms, top-down monitoring, technological improvements, and community engagement have been studied. So in this paper, we are proposing that informal networks can also be another means to improve local service delivery. Related to our paper, there are also these other papers that show that caste networks can work as a conduit for transmitting information and enabling enforcement, but in other contexts, for example, politics and also banking. Okay, so I would need to provide you a little bit about the design of this program before I get to the nuts and bolts of the paper. So at the top is the Government of India, which procures grains from the farmers, and then it funnels it to the state governments, which then there is a multi level distribution channel, but then eventually there's a network of about 450,000 government licensed PDS shops, which eventually then sell the subsidized goods to the households. The households go to the nearest PDS, which they are assigned to by the government, and they pick their monthly allocations. The PDS shopkeepers must sell rice and wheat at below market rates to the BPL households. But everyone is entitled to sugar, and the households that do not have LPG connections are also entitled to kerosene. You also have to have a ration card to make any purchases, and all your purchases are recorded in these ration cards. States have mandated that, so Government of India has mandated that states carry out BPL surveys periodically, and but there's a centrally imposed caps because not all BPL households in the country can be serviced. So the government then allocates grains to the states based on the number of BPL families. There's a central issue price for BPL allocations. It's 3.5 per kg for rice and 2.5 per kg for wheat. State governments are not allowed to add more than 50 paisa to the price when selling to the BPL households. More recently, they've added another type of households called the Antodaya households, and states cannot add anything to the price for those groups. Okay, so there is widespread corruption in this entire system from top down, but we are going to really focus on the shops. So the markups for these shops are really low. So for example, for wheat, the markup is 6 paisa per kg. So, and then there are also limited monitoring. So these things incentivize the shopkeepers to siphon off goods and sell them on black markets. There's widespread evidence of leakage. There's a thriving black market. For example, there's a study done by a Delhi-based NGO called Parivartan, and they showed that there are massive discrepancies between the official records and ration cards of slum dwellers that they surveyed. They also demonstrated existence of ghost cards. The most common mode of covering up corruption is that the shopkeepers would go to the nearest town and they would sell their goods, and then they would tell the stockholder, the households that they're stocked out. Okay, so in terms of data, we used the survey of living conditions for Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, which was conducted by the World Bank in 1997. It has comprehensive data on caste of the shopkeepers, households, various types of market purchases of food items, PDS purchases, prices, and other household demographic characteristics that are relevant for us. In terms of summary statistics, some of the key relevant points are that we have similar characteristics of households in the villages where we have SC shopkeepers and in the villages that have a non-SC shopkeepers. But importantly, the proportion of households that have a BPL card are higher in villages with SC shopkeepers, and this is going to be important later on, so bear this in mind. Okay, so how do the SC households differ by shopkeeper type? The main differences are at the bottom. They are plurality caste in the villages with SC keepers. They also have the pradhan from their own caste. They are the village's largest subcaste and most dominant, the land dominant subcaste as well. Okay, so then 3 other things that are important for what we're going to do subsequently are that grain purchases are less common than kerosene. Grain and sugar are often deemed worse in terms of market quality. There's very little variation in prices charged regardless of the good, but an important thing is that the vast majority of the households purchase their full entitlement, which is 3 kgs of rice and 7 kg of wheat. So if they do purchase, you see them picking up their entire entitlement. Okay, so this is going to motivate most of what we do. So this is like our baseline results. What you see here are so this panel is for the SE households, and this is proportion making purchases. So for grain, sugar, and kerosene, and the golden tabs are for the villages where the shopkeeper is from the SC, and the brown tabs are where the shopkeeper is non-SC. So grain purchases, which is the first tab, you see that they're significantly higher for SC households in villages that have an SC shopkeeper. Whereas if you look at non-SCs, they don't have this benefit. When they face an SC shopkeeper, their grain purchases are actually lower. And if you look at the last panel, which is for kerosene, there is no difference, right? So this is some our baseline results. So we formalize these results using this particular estimation or empirical specification. So take up of household I in village V is given. We are estimating this particular model. S is an indicator variable, which is 1 if the shopkeeper is SC. B is an indicator which is 1 if the buyer household is SC. And the interaction term is what is of interest to us. Okay, so in a simple OLS approach, we find the coefficient on this interaction term to be 0.4, and for kerosene it's 0.04. So a lot of our observations are outside the unit interval for kerosene, so we do not use an OLS. We actually use a probate model, and we calculate delta for each of the regressions that we carry out. Okay, so in terms of empirical strategy, the caste of the shopkeeper is influenced by the 72nd Amendment of the Constitution. In Uttar Pradesh, the villages which were reserved for SC council head were also reserved for shopkeepers to be from scheduled castes. And by the time of this survey, the SCs were already officiating in the reserved seats, but we do not have data on the tenure of the shopkeepers, so we can't directly use this amendment. This rule for reserving the seats was based on the SC population in the villages, so we could potentially instrument with that. But we are worried that the SC population share belongs to a structural relationship. So you could think that, if SCs are in plurality, that could affect, monitoring or enforcement, or higher officials could be paying less care to such type of villages. So as a result, what we do is we control for SC population shares in our structural relation. So our identifying assumption is that conditional on populations of SCs, caste of the village pradhan and the village's largest and land dominant subcaste, the variation in the PDS shopkeeper's caste is plausibly exogenous. We also run out several endogeneity stories by carefully looking at controlling a lot of characteristics in our specifications, and also doing random effects probate models at the village level. So this interaction term, for the rest of the talk, I'm going to call it the caste pairing effect. So this is very robust to all these specifications. Okay, so this is the result. So what you see is that, so in that red box I reported the interaction results. For grain, it's positive and highly statistically significant. For sugar and kerosene, it's indistinguishable from zero. And the delta, which is calculated for grain, sugar and kerosene reported in the last row, is fairly high for grain for SC households. I have only reported the relevant variables here, but we do control for a bunch of other things in these regressions. Okay, so this table then begs the question, what's going on? So that's, I think, the meat of the paper. What we think is that the caste of the SC households is working as an enforcement and monitoring mechanism That's our hypothesis. So we build a model around that. And this is a two-period game. In this, there are two players, the households and the shopkeepers. The households take goods, prices, and income as given, and decide how much market grain, PDS grain, and other goods to buy. They also decide how much to invest in monitoring and enforcement, which is costly to them. The shopkeeper looks at that and compares the gain from selling to a household's entitlement on the black market to the expected fine if they get caught. Expected fine is the probability of being fined, and the actual fine. This fine is not just the formal fine. This can also be the bribes that they have to pay to the officials, or they could include social sanctions. And the timing is obviously the households move first, and then the shopkeeper decides whether or not to sell. So what we're going to do is three things with this particular model. We are first going to take this model to our data and see if we can find any corroborating evidence to support this hypothesis. The second thing is we are going to structurally estimate this model, and then third thing we are going to be able to do because of that is simulate some policies and speak to this debate about the national food security bill. Okay, so this is the households optimization problem where XM is the gain. So before I tell you a little bit more about the model, let me tell you about the assumptions that we make. We are only going to focus on grain, and we are going to consider static models. So this is just to make the analysis more tractable and focus on the problem at hand. We also assume that if the household makes a PDS purchase, they take their full entitlement, and if the shopkeeper decides to sell to the household, it sells them their full entitlement. Then this bears out in the summary statistics. So this is a regularity that we find in the data. So we just taking that and incorporating it into the model. We also assume that 1 unit of effort made towards monitoring and enforcement is same no matter who in the village exerts that effort. Okay, so with those assumptions, this is the optimization problem of the household. XM is the grain purchase, market grain purchase. The XS is the PDS grains. Then Q is the expenditure on non-grain goods. CT is the cost of taking up goods from the PDS, and it includes the monitoring cost. And kappa is the other net utility you might derive from using the PDS. Gamma is the entitlement here. Okay, so the shopkeeper chooses whether or not to sell to the household SI, and solves the following problem where PM and PS are the market and PDS prices. PA is the price that the shopkeeper has to pay to the government, and delta IM is the probability that the shopkeeper will be reprimanded by household I. Okay, so an F is the fine that the shopkeeper would face, and we assume that delta IM takes this form. Okay, so what's the intuition? The intuition is that if you have a shopkeeper from your own caste, that can translate into discernible monitoring and enforcement advantage or benefit only if information is important for many members of your own caste or your network, and this information is not forthcoming from others, so people from other castes. So the marginal value of information from own network is higher for SCs than for other castes for grain, and this is because, as I mentioned before, the SCs are more represented in the BPL, at least in Uttar Pradesh. So that's the reason that marginal value of information from own network is higher for grains and not other goods. Yes.
So what is the information about what is specific to?
So this is the information about the shopkeeper. So when is he getting goods?
Specific to a good as opposed to a person shopkeeper. That if he's corrupt, he can be corrupted.
So this is when is this particular good being delivered to the village, and also things like, is he corrupt? Is he siphoning off goods? So for example, if I'm the shopkeeper from my own network, people from my network are going to know my financial situation. So they might know what is the degree of corruption I'm engaging in. So that's the type of information that might be easy to flow within your network. Okay, so on the other hand, sugar and kerosene is demanded by everybody in the village. So as a result, the information flow is more forthcoming. There's more flow of information. Hence, the marginal value of information from your own network is lower, right? So these things add up. Then we should expect a caste pairing effect for SEs for grains, but not other goods, right? So that's the intuition. We have some additional results that support this intuition. So first off, this information, it should be more valuable to you when monitoring is costly. So we look at households who live further away from the PDS shop. So if you live farther away, you cannot look at when the goods are arriving at the shop, when are they being delivered. So in that case, to such type of households, this information should be much more valuable, and that's what we see. So I'm going to try and show you this result. So we do the same. This is the same specification as before, but now we have a triple interaction. Because we don't have a lot of variation in the distance of the household from the shopkeeper, so we construct a dummy variable whether the household lives within 0.5 kilometers or away from the shop, and we interacted with the caste pairing effect, and we do see that if you live farther away, the caste pairing effect is positive and significant. Or if you live close by, you don't care about that information. Okay, so then the second thing is that the size of network should matter. So if there are more people in your own caste who care for this particular product, then the caste pairing effect should get stronger for you. And so we also see this bearing out in the data. So this is again the same random effect COVID model of take-up of grains, and now we interact the caste pairing effect with the SC population, and we do see that the larger the number of people in your network, in the population of SCs in the village, the more stronger this result is. We evaluate this caste pairing effect at the minimum, mean and the maximum of the SC population. For the minimum, it's insignificant. For mean and for the maximum, it's positive and highly statistically significant at 1%. Okay, so the third thing is that information flows increasing the number of network members who are entitled to the good. So generally in the village, if you have more BPL households, you should expect the grain take up to be higher, and so we see that in the data as well. And in the interest of time, I think I'm going to skip showing you this particular result, but it's in the data. BPL allocation, stigma, credit provision, knowledge of entitlements, and household production opportunities. Okay, so having said that, let me walk you through the structural model solution, which is very straightforward. N star is the amount of monitoring effort that makes the shopkeeper indifferent between selling to the household or selling to the black market. Then we can calculate the unique equilibrium. In terms of the procedure, we model the joint distribution of take-up and log of market grain purchases, and we assume this particular form for the grain purchases. There's two sources of heterogeneity, eta and CT, which is the cost of taking up PDS grain. We assume that they are independent, and that gives us a lot of traction. Eta is assumed to have a normal distribution, and CT has an exponential distribution, and we maximize the likelihood function. Okay, so in terms of results, we get very expected results. Alpha is calculated to be 0.24. PDS grain is slightly inferior to the market grain. SCs see a higher utility gain from take-up conditional on prices and income, and we see very expected patterns of monitoring and enforcement. So then we validate this. We look at the fit to the UP data. Not a big surprise that the fit is very good because we've used the data to estimate the model, but we do an out-of-sample check using the Bihar data. And so, how much time do I have left? Okay, so I have 10 minutes. So let me show you the fit here. So this is the log grain purchase, both market and PDS for UP on the top panel and for Bihar in the bottom panel. And the red bars are the average predicted by the model, and the gray bars are the actual averages. We do observe very low take-up in Bihar, so we do a couple of things. We increase the mean cost of monitoring so that we match the overall observed take-up rate, and we also increase the fine so that it incentivizes a lot of people to exert monitoring effort. With those two things, everything else in the model is left unchanged. With those two things, we see that the fit for Bihar is fairly good. It's within 5 percentage points. We just missed it by that. And so this is take-up. For the top panel is UP and the bottom panel is Bihar. In take-up, we do overshoot for at least SC shopkeepers. Okay, so what are the implications? We do two things now. We use this model and the estimated parameters to look at welfare gains from changing or lowering monitoring and enforcement costs. We examine the gains to SCs of changing costs and amount equivalent to going from non-SC to SC shopkeepers, and we calculate the equivalent surplus, and we report the mean and the 75th percentile of the potential gains. The other thing we do is a simulation exercise in which we evaluate the impact of increasing the PDS subsidy on take-up. So there are two effects going in the opposite direction. If you increase the subsidy, the demand by the households would go up, but also that would increase the incentives of the shopkeeper to siphon off grains. So first, let me show you the results for lowering the monitoring costs for SCs. So this is the mean equivalent surplus. So each bar represents the number of or proportion of people for that value, and so the mean weighted average here is 4.64, and the standard deviation is 1.47, and this is for the 75th percentile, and here the mean weighted average is 7.73. So these seem like small numbers, but if you think about the average value of the subsidy, which is the market price minus the subsidy price times the entitlement, that's about 25. So it's a very significant, fairly high proportion of that average subsidy. So if we do lower the monitoring costs for SCs, we do see that their welfare improves. The other thing we do is we look at the semi-elasticity of take-up with respect to PDS subsidy. So this speaks to the provisions of the National Food Security Bill, which envisions making this more generous, the TPDS program. We report the semi-elasticity for various percentiles for various caste pairings. So if you look at the 50th percentile for SCs, it's about negative 0.583. So a 10% reduction in the PDS price would decrease the take-up of SCs by 5 percentage points. So that's what it translates into. So that lowers their welfare. And if you look at row 1s and row 2s, what you see is that the effects are more emphatic for SCs across the board, right? So, and the SC population suffers more from this. So the bottom line here is then that if you increase the generosity of the program without increasing monitoring or enforcement efforts, then that's not going to generate the expected benefits that you might have in mind. It can in fact have perverse effects. Okay, so what are our specific findings? We see that SCs have a higher take-up when they face SC shopkeepers as opposed to non-SC shopkeepers. Evidence suggests that this could be driven by monitoring and enforcement. Welfare implications of reducing monitoring costs could be qualitatively important. As we calculated, they are 1/5 of the subsidy for the SC households. If you increase the generosity of the program, without thinking about consequences, adverse consequences for vulnerable populations, we're not going to get the intended effects. Okay, so as I mentioned, if I'm doing good on time, I'll speak to these alternate channels. So, how much time do I have?
You have 5 minutes, but you don't have
Okay, so that's a subtle message that says we all want to go home and sleep. So I'll stop at that. So one thing that I do want to mention is that there are a couple of caveats that I want to highlight. One is that I did say that this is consistent with monitoring and enforcement. So because you see these effects for grain and not for kerosene and sugar, we think that just enforcement alone, so social sanctions alone, cannot explain these results, because then you would see those type of things happening for kerosene as well. But what we cannot rule out is that there is monitoring as well as enforcement going on. So we can't really nail down whether it's monitoring or enforcement, and that's where IGC has been very generous and stepped in to help us conduct primary data collection, and so hopefully we'll be able to speak to that a little bit in the near future. So with that, I'll ask Professor Potwal to proceed with this.
I kind of like this paper. It's a lot has been written about PDS and its functioning, and I've never seen anybody talk about the caste, the effects of caste on PDS. And caste seems to be very important in institutions at all levels in India, right? So this is certainly the first study of the role of caste in PDS, and it's important. Caste networks and monitoring. So most of my comments are really, very the kind of things that are not clear to me. Now, as I understand Munshi Rosenweit paper, the caste networks operate at a very sub-caste level, right? See, the groupings you have here, SCs, SCs can be a narrow grouping, but non-SC is a very big grouping, right? And so if the networks, I imagine even within SC there are Mahas and Chamas, so on, that those networks really work at the sub-caste level. So I was a bit surprised that, I'm not sure in this data how narrow these groupings are. Because the social sanctions, information, etc., does it really go from a subcaste to subcaste? Okay, now what you have here is really the whole puzzle, and the motivation is in these two graphs, right? So this is the SC households now, and the non-SC households, right? So you can see, first of all, this caste pairing effect right there, that non-SC, the SC households, they're buying more from the SC shopkeeper, and you can see the caste networks at work. You can say the same thing about the non-SC households, assuming that these networks are working at this grouping. Kerosene is an exception, right? Now, the explanation you have is all based on this informal monitoring and enforcement. Okay, and then you say that you have these two conditions on page 16, right? The information is important because the good question is important. That's where I asked you, if the information is about the character of the shopkeeper, right, or the habits, why is it specific to a good? I mean, if the same shop is selling kerosene and grain, if it's corrupt in selling grain, the same information should be valid for kerosene. So when you try to explain why kerosene is different, this I don't find that convincing. That is because grain as a good is important to SCs. Yeah. Okay. Now, one very nice thing about the paper is you just look at all these different explanations and rule them out, right? But what about, I mean, I'm just kind of throwing up another explanation, right? Because it's caste, that there are these ideas of caste purity, and they apply most stringently to food items. So maybe kerosene, first of all, kerosene can be different from grain and sugar in that sense, that and so supposing I say two things. One is that the non-SCs don't like to buy food items from an SC shopkeeper on purity grounds, right? They're eating something that's coming from a SC shopkeeper. And secondly, now if they're buying less from a certain shopkeeper, why is that? Because that shopkeeper is selling it diverting it to open market, right? So supposing I have, so these two things is caste purity, and the second thing is that the non-SC shopkeepers have probably a better trading network outside to sell it on the open market, right? Then I could explain those graphs in those terms, right? So as far as kerosene is concerned, caste purity is not a matter, but still they're always buying more from SCs. Why? Because whichever way they can make money, be corrupt or sell kerosene in the black market, the non-SCs have a better avenue, better networks, right? And then so in general, they will the non-SC shopkeepers will always be able to sell more because they're better networks. But at the same time, with food, the non-SC households won't buy from the SC shopkeepers, right? So that I'm just throwing it up as an explanation. Can you rule that out? Secondly, you talk about welfare. Now, whose welfare? I mean, indeed, if you go from non-SC shopkeepers to SC shopkeepers, the SC households will see an improvement in their welfare. What about non-SC households? Right? If you take that into account, what's the overall effect? Yeah, so that's where I'll stop, and you can take more questions.
Another explanation just being that there is some kind of solidarity with skin and kinship affinity and stuff like that. So because you can also answer this question: what happens to aggregate leakage when you do that policy experiment? So
there is variation in whether or not there is an SC shopholder in the first place, and I know certainly certain states have quotas whereby they need a certain number of these guys to be SCs. So at least in the Bihar Food Secretary's office, I've seen I'm making these charts where they're really showing how many of each type. So I don't know if there's any allocation rule or any kind of I don't know if you looked into that and get a sense of why there is variation, or if they have some records in the process of allotting these shops. Just anything that you can do to kind of say that why there is variation is not a function of how strong the SCs are in that area, and that's just a standard of individual problem.
amendment, the seats that were reserved for the SC Pradhans also had SC shopkeepers, and we did go to Uttar Pradesh. We went to the food and civil supplies offices begging for records, and without any luck. But we try again. So that your point is well taken. But there is a criterion for reserving the SC seats, which was the population share. And as I mentioned, we can't instrument with it because we think that belongs to the structural regression. So we control for that. We also control for whether or not the Pradhan is SC. And so conditional on that.
If there's a population cutoff, can you discuss?
But since we're going to do some primary data collection and going back to these offices, we'll keep this in mind and try to see what we can do. In terms of the solidarity effect, that's a possibility, except why wouldn't we see an effect for kerosene? Because to my knowledge, there's no open market for kerosene. So if anything, if you want to be, if you want to help the members of your network or be nice to them, if anything, you would take the kerosene from other guys and give it to them. But we don't see that. We also do not see any type of effects on prices, quality, or quantity. So if you wanted to help members of your network, you could help it up on those dimensions as well, but we don't see an effect. In terms of aggregate leakage, we would really like to do that. So, but for that, we're going to need some, sense of leakage, in the sense what goes into the villages and what's being taken up by the households. Again, thanks to IGC, that's going to be possible in the next few months. And so your point is well taken that we can speak to aggregate leakage, and so we'll do that. And similar to that, the non-SC welfare and speak to the overall welfare. I think that's a very good idea and suggestion. We would like to do that. As for your purity story goes, I could think a little bit more about that, but top of my head, I can't reconcile it with the fact that we don't see these effects for households that live close to the PDS shop. So this purity story, is not very consistent with this distance triple interaction that we do see for grains and not for kerosene. What sort of information? I guess we will clarify this in the paper. So we did speak to large landowners and some press folks in Uttar Pradesh, and the type of information that we have in mind is when is the stock arriving at the PDS shopkeeper's shop, and when is he trying to give it to the people? Because as I mentioned before, the main form of corruption here is that they sell it to a nearest town, and then they say, household goes there and they say, oh, we are stocked out, right? So it's crucial to know when are the goods arriving at the shop. And so just self-promoting our forthcoming work, the government of Uttar Pradesh has started a program in which they are providing this information to residents of the villages in 2 districts by SMS, that your stock was picked up by the shopkeeper, and so we want to kind of see how that interacts with these networks. You also mentioned about the subcost. We would have liked to do that, and subcost information is available in the data set, except the sample size is very small to give us any type of power. So there are like 3 people from particular subcost within SC. So that's what dictated our lumping of SCs together. But your point is well taken that if anything, this information might be flowing across subcasts. So when we do go to do some work in these villages, we will be planning on doing some qualitative group discussion based analysis as well. So we'll try to figure out, do we find any type of evidence whether this happens at the subcaste level, or the subcasts are able to communicate with each other. So thanks a lot for all your comments, and it's been a pleasure being here.
Is the subsidized
The
does not
range
flow through the PDS network?
It's the same in the village.
It's the same.
Price differential is small.
Very good.
So, I have this 2 times after this 7th of 11th. So, we look at many of these changes in the caste of pronunciation, caste of PDS.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Then I'd really like to talk to you afterwards. Thank you.
About the subclass bigger
Yeah, well, right now about these things. So we did speak to a few people, and they said that we talked to each other about whether the food stuff has arrived or not. So, but we will speak to that a little bit more in the next iteration of the paper.
No.
Okay, thank you very much. And with this, we bring the session to the end. Thanks.